Oh, she's gonna dismantle this one. I can tell. Look at the smile. Look at the face. She's gonna dismantle them.
Yes, I did know that Cleopatra of Egypt was actually Greek.
She's telling it how it is. Metatron approved. She's great. I wonder how she got Wired, of all places, to post this video.
Enka en Amenemhat Mes en Eep.
I'm sorry, I gotta stop this one. This is so good. Hey, noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and we're back with Egyptology, my friend. Egyptology. Just 4 days ago, I made a video reaction to a Egyptologist at History Hit channel that was quite disappointing in the sense that he was okay, particularly compared to other horrible professors that I've covered, such as in that trash of a channel that is Vanity Fair, for instance. But then he had this huge, massive cop-out whenever a slightly controversial question would come up, and he would not respect the question, and he would just use these massive cop-outs that was really, really disappointing. But when it comes to History Hit, it's like a hit or miss, pun intended, I guess. So I don't think they have an agenda. I just think they just get these experts and it's like a dice roll. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. However, the same cannot be said about Wired, and today I found out that they have an Egyptologist. I'm kind of curious to see what we've got. I mean, maybe today they just so happen to get someone that just told it how it is and didn't push anything weird. But of course, if she's gonna twist history, oh, I'll call her out. I'll call every single one of them out. All of them. I'm going to become their nemesis.
I'm Professor Laurel Bestock. Let's answer some questions from the internet. This is Egyptology support.
Good. Let's go. Got my drink here.
At FH Huntress asks, when did ancient Egypt begin exactly, according to you? Ancient Egypt's really old. If we talk about when the first king of Egypt actually became king, we're talking about 3000 BC. And then we put ourselves on this timeline. That would be an even 5,000 years. So this then would be when we change from BC to AD. And we could say, Cleopatra is really close to that. So the pyramids at Giza are about 2400 BC. Not only are we closer in time to Cleopatra than Cleopatra is to the beginning of ancient Egyptian pharaonic history, there's even more time between Cleopatra and the pyramids than there is between Cleopatra and us.
Between Cleopatra and an Xbox Series X. Yeah, that's a very good answer. But yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Cleopatra is closer to my Amiga 500 than to the pyramids.
Ancient Egypt was already ancient in ancient Egypt.
Oh, I love it. Ancient Egypt was already ancient in ancient Egypt. That is so good. Oh, that is so good. We're starting well. I love that. That was really fun. I like her. As of now. Don't want to speak too soon.
Khan asks, watching this show called Ancient Aliens on Netflix. Yeah, so I can't sleep now. Why do the pyramids of Egypt match those in Mexico?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm so thrilled to see what she's going to say. They don't match, by the way. But I am thrilled to see what she's going to say.
Pyramids in Egypt don't actually match the pyramids in Mexico. They are different in substantial ways. The king is buried in a small chamber underneath the pyramid in Egypt. The pyramids, as you see them today, look like giant staircases. They're a little bit rough, and that's not how they would have looked anciently. So the final step in making a pyramid would have been to clad it in very fine limestone, and then to shave the sides to make it perfectly smooth. So this would have been not something you could climb anciently. The pyramids in Mexico are not tombs at all. These are bases for temples, and the temples are approached by going up the pyramid. That said, why do they look similar? Why is this basic form of a pyramid found in multiple so different places of the ancient world? And there the answer is pretty simple, and it's that there's not that much you can build of that size without modern technology and without steel. So to get a really tall structure out of stone, it needs to be smaller at the top than it is at the bottom. So there's not all that many things you can build that would get that tall.
I mean, towers can get really tall even without steel. A minute disagreement I have here. But then again, I'm kind of nitpicking and I'm being pedantic, I'll admit it, because she did say there aren't that many. So within those, towers, I imagine, would be classified. So not a disagreement. I just like to point out towers will be some of those. Okay, so not a disagreement.
Using this technology. And that's really, we think, why we see what looks superficially similar in such different places.
Very good answer. Very good answer.
Betchero asks, why did ancient Egypt fall? So the fall of ancient Egypt, from a royal perspective, when do there stop being kings of Egypt, is really when Egypt gets incorporated into the Roman Empire, when Cleopatra loses the throne. Lambe Turing asks,
That's it? Okay. That would have been a good question to expand on. Also, I understand why she's choosing the period when ancient Egypt becomes a Roman province as a moment of fall, if you will, because now it isn't the Egyptians who are in power. But then again, shouldn't you choose the Ptolemaic reign then? Because at the end of the day, Ptolemaics were not native Egyptians. They were Greeks, as we know. So already they had been ruling for a good 300 years before the Romans took over, and there was the whole conundrum between first Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, or Julius Caesar, then Cleopatra and Mark Antony. They lose against Augustus. Yay, Augustus, by the way. And of course, that changes everything because now Egypt becomes a province of the Roman Empire. And so they lose their independence, if you will. But then again, already when the Greeks were in power, it wasn't the Egyptian native pharaohs in power anymore. Now, given Cleopatra was a ruler that wanted to connect to the Egyptian population, but she was the only one who wanted to do that. She was the only one who even bothered to learn ancient Egyptians and to understand the language of the natives. So can you imagine that? All of the other rulers of the Ptolemaic dynasty for hundreds of years did not even bother, even though they were born there, to learn Egyptian. How Egyptians can they be then, is my question. If they are keeping it within themselves, they breed with their own brothers and sisters because they do not want to mingle with the native Egyptians. They don't learn the language. So there is that. I think that would be a more appropriate answer in that point from a logical perspective.
Did you know that Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, was actually Greek?
Yeah.
Yes, I did know that Cleopatra of Egypt was actually Greek.
She's telling it how it is. Metatron approved. She's great.
She was the descendant of a Greek family that had been ruling Egypt for about 300 years when Alexander the Great in 332 BC conquered Egypt. Egypt then became part of empires elsewhere in the Mediterranean. We don't actually know all that much about Cleopatra. We do know that she was bilingual and spoke both Egyptian and Greek. Cleopatra did hook up with Julius Caesar. She also had children with Mark Antony. She was definitely playing to keep her kingdom. At Paul.
Very good. Okay, she gave a good answer. See, that's what I mean. If this was the other Egyptologist and he was told, did you know that Cleopatra was actually Greek? You know what he would have said? Well, Cleopatra was a human being. And that's what we need to focus on. So don't say she was Greek. She was a human being, just like the Egyptian. That's what he would have said, which is why he made me cringe so hard. But she's good, you know? She's not afraid to say it. Cleopatra was Greek. Good. Thank you. And you know, what I appreciate about her, and I think what I can learn from her as someone who makes content about this, is that you can tell that I am annoyed, visibly annoyed, but the people are like, she wasn't Greek, don't say it, and that kind of stuff. And I'm visibly annoyed, and I can go like pretty strongly against it. She does it with a smile. She's telling it how it is, but she does it with a smile. And I think that in that sense, she's even better than me, because I appreciate she's telling the truth, but also because I can tell she's passionate about ancient Egypt. And I appreciate that. I wonder how she got Wired, of all places, to post this video. I wonder how.
A long string of letters and numbers asks, Egypt is overrated anyway, in my opinion. What did they invent that was so transformative on the modern world?
Oh, she's gonna dismantle this one. I can tell. Look at the smile. Look at the face. She's gonna dismantle them. All right, but all of that is great. But you know what isn't great? Was something that has been unfortunately happening to me quite a lot, and it has become a part of my routine, which is dealing with spam emails. Literally. You know, sometimes you probably ask yourself, okay, but how did all of these people get my email information, my phone number? And the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, they bought it. So basically, you look something up and you start getting emails about the very thing you were looking up. Well, what's happening is that these companies are selling your data to data brokers who aggregate your information and sell it to other businesses, marketing agencies, and advertisers. Meaning your name, age, contact information, login credentials, phone number, email address, browsing history, where you live, social security number, which is why I'd like to mention the dear sponsor of this video, Incogni. Now, Incogni is a very useful tool that goes out and takes you off these lists. And really, all you need to do, 3 things. 1, sign up for the service. 2, give them permission to act in your behalf. 3, relax and watch them do their work. And Incogni will go out and find these lists which contain your personal information and demand that your info is taken off. And the great thing about Incogni is that, as you can see here, this is my dashboard because of course I use the service. I have an annual subscription. On the dashboard you can literally monitor what the website is doing for you. Here's the number of requests sent, the number that have been processed, and the completed ones. So already, as you can see, they found multiple records that might belong to you. Please identify and select the ones that best match your profile, because this would be a monumental task. Sure, you could do manually, but you would have to repeat the process and be good at it every month. So I am very grateful for Incogni because they take care of that for me. The reality is that your personal information is constantly bought and sold. And of course, this can lead to horrible things such as identity theft, online data breaches, which does put your privacy and the privacy of your loved ones at risk. So if you too want to improve and increase your personal privacy, click the link in the description below and you will get access to an amazing discount. And at the same time, you'll be supporting my channel as well. Go to incogni.com/Metatron or click the link in the description below and use the code Metatron to get an exclusive 60% off your annual Incogni plan. And as always, massive thanks to Incogni for supporting and sponsoring my video.
We could talk, for instance, about the mobile writing platform of Papyrus.
Yeah.
We write on paper, which is a Chinese invention, but that writing should be done by a pen and that you should be able to send it somewhere easily. That is something the Egyptians absolutely pioneered.
Yep.
Ancient Egyptian mud brick architecture was so amazing that the ancient Egyptian word for brick has actually made it into English. That's our word adobe, comes from the ancient Egyptian, ultimately acknowledging how excellent their architecture was.
Boom, destroyed with facts. Love it. Love it. And one thing to say about Papyrus, you know, in my experience as someone who loves history and is really passionate about it, I've of course been to many, many museums throughout my life, differently to what this clown said on the comment where he, under one of my videos, when, you know, it's just the people that get upset because I tell the truth. And he's like, this dude Metatron talks about the truth, but he obviously never been to a damn museum. Absolute idiot. I have the videos. Like, this is how stupid my detractors are. They don't even try. I would appreciate a little challenge, a little intellectual challenge, clown, because I have videos where I show that I go into the museums and take my viewers with me. Anyways, when I was invited to the Vatican Secret Archives, I've been there, been underground, seen all of the different areas underneath the Vatican. One of the things that really stuck with me is when they took out a papyrus, and then they took out period, and then they took out a scroll. These are, as she's saying, alternative and more ancient media that we use in order to be able to write before paper was a thing in Europe. And what is fascinating about both methodologies, both media, papyri and scrolls, is that they feel very different to the touch. Yes, I was allowed to touch it. And even though a papyrus is a little rougher than paper, but it feels consistent on both sides, a scroll, since it's made of animal skin, actually feels different depending on which side you touch of a page. And that's something I can say because, again, I touched an original. I was allowed to. I didn't do anything weird. So what that means is that, of course, animal skin has an under section and an over section. The part on the top feels porous to the touch because it's where all the hair, all the fur comes out of, and you can feel that. But then the other side of the page, since it's the other side of the skin, feels extremely smooth. Isn't that fascinating? I just wanted to add something fun while making fun of the clowns. She's absolutely right, and fascinating stuff. And then we started growing papyri, by the way, already in Syracuse, for example. They still do today as a plant because of this.
Will someone ever decipher this ancient language? Imagine the knowledge lost. In
Oh.
fact, someone has deciphered ancient
Yeah.
Egyptian hieroglyphs, and scholars can read virtually any inscription that we find. This is a very typical type of monument. And what we see here is a dead guy and his wife, and what they want is to receive offerings for the rest of their afterlife. And that's what the inscription tells us. So we read this, Hetep di Nesu, and NKN, for the Ka of Amenemhat, the name of this guy. So NKN Amenemhat Mes en Eep.
I'm sorry, I gotta stop this one. This is so good. Like, the person says, oh, I wish we could decipher the hieroglyphs, and then she just goes straight ahead and reads the hieroglyphs like it's English. I love it.
Or the Ka of Amenemhat, born of Eep, his father's name. At Roxy B1 1994 asks, does anybody know why the ancient Egyptians never painted people front on, but only sideways on? Let's take a look at an illustrated copy of the Book of the Dead. So they chose the most typical, the most perfect aspect of every part of the body. The person is shown in profile so that you get the nose in profile, but the eye is always shown front on. Shoulders are always shown front on, even though the arms and legs are twisted in ways that are impossible. You can't actually walk like an Egyptian. In some ways, you can think of ancient Egyptian art like cubism. It's showing the same thing from different angles, from different perspectives. They wanted a picture of a person to capture the essence of that person in a way that was much more eternal. Their art deliberately did not look like anything you could see with your own eyes. It's more of a God's eye view.
Like, it's similar. We have some painting conventions, very likely that what she's saying is true. Of course, that would be what was in the mind of the most sophisticated of the artists that were involved and also have a degree of knowledge and connection to the ceremonial aspects of ancient Egyptian culture. So with time, something will become a convention, an artistic convention, and therefore the people that then repeat the convention are not necessarily thinking that deeply about it, just becomes something you do. We see this happening. I'm not contrasting her, I'm just adding on to what she's saying. And we see this, for example, in ancient Roman monumental art. For instance, in the Trajan column, just to mention one, that sort of triumphant art. The Roman legionaries, the shields are smaller, the helmets tend to be smaller than real perspective, and they do that to save space, because at the end of the day, a Roman shield can be pretty big, and you don't want to hide all of those details of the legionaries, and therefore it becomes a convention to make it smaller, and then people just repeat it, further artists down the line. And we see that all over medieval art and manuscript illuminations. There are just some conventions that become the norm, and that's just how you draw a human being or how you draw an element of equipment, if you will, of the military.
Atsunaze asks, seriously, how did the Sphinx's nose break? Our best evidence for how the nose of the Sphinx got broken comes from a 15th century Arabic historian. And he explains that someone who was angry actually deliberately shot the nose off the Sphinx because he was upset that people were revering this monument from ancient Egypt. This person was subsequently lynched by other local people who revered the Sphinx. So there are also stories that Napoleon's army shot the nose off the Sphinx. Not. We think that one's probably not right, in part because we have drawings of the Sphinx from earlier than Napoleon's expedition, and the nose is already missing. The Sphinx depicts the king Khafre. Khafre, a king of the 4th dynasty, built the second largest pyramid at Giza. At Silent Ushi asks,
okay, that was the end. It was kind of edited in a little weird way. Okay, no, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. And the reason why, I'm just going to provide a little context here, because, she didn't for whatever reason. But the reason why they're asking the question, and it has this little emoji, is because there is this idea now that is being pushed on the internet that the reason why the noses have been knocked off the statues is to hide the ancient Egyptians' true ethnicity. It's nonsense, of course. The noses, as for other appendix, so sections of statues, are a very fragile element that does happen to crumble. Now, specifically, her answer was really good when it comes to the Sphinx proper, but the question was asked because of that. Because there is a whole discussion about how noses were purposely removed because they had to hide, as if you just remove a nose, you wouldn't be able to tell someone's ethnicity. It's nonsense. Here we are. Okay, let's go.
Hajara Salisu asks, why do Egyptians mummify their dead? What's the point of preserving the dead? And they did this because they believed that in the afterlife, people needed their body. They continued to eat and to drink, to speak and breathe, and even to engage in social relations with the people they had known in life.
That is very interesting.
Most people in ancient Egypt weren't mummified. It was an expensive process. In fact, it wasn't necessary in order for bodies to be preserved. The Egyptian desert itself does a great job of preserving bodies. But for those people who could afford mummification, cloth was really expensive in the ancient world.
I'm going to have to stop it a second because it's a very long point and I don't want to, because there are already a couple of things I want to say. So, of course, the ancient Egyptian religion was a lot more physical, if you will. There was a connection between physicality, the body, and the afterlife. She said that absolutely correctly. The idea, however, that you would be resurrected in the body is not necessarily unique to ancient Egyptian religion. At the end of the day, the resurrection of the body is also part of Christian religion, if you think about it. Yes, we think that within Christian religion, often, it depends on the religion specifically, but generally speaking, within Christianity, you think about the soul, then the soul leaves the body, but eventually will be restored to the body. There is the resurrection of the body, something that happens in the Gospels as well. People that are literally raised from the dead and they start walking the earth. Lazarus was resurrected in the body. Christ was resurrected with the body. And in fact, what does Christ do after his resurrection? He eats and drinks with the disciples. So there is a connection there. It's not something that is unique to ancient Egyptian art and culture and religion, but it's something that is found, in fact, in a lot of religions. The physicality of the resurrection of the dead and the physicality of the afterlife is something that is present in many religions, including Greek religion. Maybe something I can expand on a little bit on a dedicated video.
The linen that was used would have included oils and resins, and we also know that they used forms of salt that were naturally occurring in the desert to dry the body out. We know, for instance, that they would remove the internal organs. Internal organs are mushy.
Yeah.
If you're going to rot, it's going to be because there's so much water in your internal organs. So you take those out and mummify them separately. In some periods, they were placed in jars.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, the heart is protected by the placement of an amulet in the form of a heart that is placed over that part of the body. Ancient Egyptians didn't care that much about the brain, and often the brain was, in fact, removed from the skull cavity before a mummy was interred.
Yeah, that's gross. I'm a little weaker stomach, by the way. We all have our problems, right? We can't all be medical doctors. So yeah, talking organs is a little no-no to me, but it is fascinating. One thing that I wanted to add on the part where she says that it wasn't really necessary, I would disagree a little bit with that, but she's the expert, so do take my words with a pinch of salt. Then again, there is a difference. I mean, when a body is mummified, it will be preserved a lot longer than a body that is just naturally preserved because of the desertic environment, the wilderness, if you will. So at the end of the day, I don't think it was unnecessary when it comes to the preservation. It did a very much higher level of preservation precisely because of what she said. The fact that they removed the organs, the fact that they did all of this, if it wasn't necessary, they wouldn't have gone through it. I don't think it was unnecessary, and I do not believe that a body naturally preserves itself to the same level. Not that that's what she's saying, but it kind of hinted to it. And she did say it wasn't necessary. I think it was absolutely necessary if you wanted to guarantee the level of preservation that they wanted for the body of the people that were like very special and, you know, upper echelon of society. Slightly disagreement there, but maybe it's just because I'm misinterpreting her words. I'm sure that if this was a conversation, she would absolutely explain what she meant.
At Wide Youth Styles asks, what are some ancient Egyptian medicine and tools they created that are used to this day?
Good question.
Ancient Egyptian medicine was pretty advanced. We know, for instance, that they performed surgery to relieve pressure on the brain. We have things, for instance, like pregnancy tests in ancient Egypt. A woman who wants to know if she's pregnant and wants to know what the sex of the baby will be should pee on both barley and wheat seeds. If she's pregnant, these are gonna sprout, and which one sprouts first is gonna tell her whether she's gonna have a girl or a boy. And modern tests on this have suggested that, in fact, the human growth hormone that is so increased in pregnant women does have an effect on the germination of grain.
That is mind-blowing. See, I'm learning something I did not know, and it's fascinating stuff. I was opposing the other day one of these professors that was talking about ancient medicine, and he was like, oh, I don't know anything. But no, she's a much better catch, to be honest, because she's showing, of course, if you compare it to modern tech and modern medicine, but you see, she's not doing that. She's not using a modernist approach. She's showing you, look, they had already figured this out without the tech that we have. And that's, I think, the better way to approach this, how ingenious ancient humans were and were able to use what they had and still show to what point people can figure out even without tech. It's fascinating stuff.
P. Puffin Stuff asks, did ancient Egypt have bars and No, ancient Egypt didn't have bars, but the Egyptians were definitely very social, and alcohol was part of their social lives. Beer. We know that the Egyptians drank a ton of beer and quite a bit of wine as well. This was mostly done in homes and even in tombs. The underground part of the tomb might be where your burial chamber is, but the above ground part of the tomb is a party palace. There's a festival called the Beautiful Feast of the Valley, where the whole point was to go get drunk in the tombs with your ancestors.
Wow.
In order to make beer and wine, we have large-scale breweries in towns from even before the first king of Egypt was present in 3000 BC.
The tradition of Egyptian beer is really, really ancient. Same with honey, by the way. That's another thing that they had access to. And apparently they found some honey that didn't spoil because, you know, honey has that characteristic. Fantastic answer. She's great. Maybe, guys, we have a good one at Wired. Miracle of the Egyptian gods.
At Princesa de New York asks, watching this video in class about what did ancient Egypt look like, and I'm pretty sure it's just scene clips from Assassin's Creed Origins.
Assassin's Creed is great, by the way. Very, very well made.
So when we check out the Assassin's Creed Origins trailer, there's a lot in there that's accurate, from the landscape itself, this sort of green strip around the Nile, then cliffs and desert a little bit farther away. And the monuments are very accurately reconstructed. You can see the pyramid with a funny shaped top. That's what we call the bent pyramid at a site called Dashur. That pyramid is actually built by the father of Khufu, the guy who built the Great Pyramid. The reason that is bent is because this is very early in the history of constructing pyramids. They were still figuring out how to build perfect pyramids, and we think that this one cracked while it was under construction, and they changed the angle so that the weight at the top would not be as great.
To add to that, since we have already reached the next point, when it comes to Assassin's Creed as a game series, they often get things right, because not only they get the architecture right, like she's saying, for example, in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they got the painted statues correct, they got the painted temples correct, so it's a very good representation of Athens in period. But then again, when it comes to Assassin's Creed Origin and Odyssey, they got the bronze right of the spearheads, of the swords, of the armor, and that's something we don't always get right, in the sense that it looks like yellow bronze, which is most likely the most correct representation of period bronze, at least when it comes to weapons and armor. Because, of course, when you think of bronze in our day and age, you think of the bronze medal, the bronze cup, or sometimes the historical reenacting cheap low-end gear that tends to be reddish bronze or brownish bronze. And that is absolutely one of the possible looks the bronze can have depending on the inner constituents. But when it comes to weapons and armor of the classical period, I think bronze would have most likely looked like what we call yellow bronze, which is more similar to brass, believe it or not, and it has more of a yellowish color. This, of course, varies. It depends, because there are many different types of bronze, but they do get that right, and I very much appreciate it. And they even get it right in Conan Exiles and other games. It's not just Assassin's Creed series, but I particularly like Assassin's Creed because you can tell that they put in the effort when it comes to the historical representation of architecture and even down to the metal. Love it.
Ednim asks, how did King Tut manage to be so popular even though he lived such a short life? King Tut is super popular with us because his tomb was found intact. The discovery of King Tut's tomb was one of the archaeological wonders of the world. If you go see this stuff in Cairo, it takes up so many rooms. You have chariots, you have shrines after shrines after shrines, nested shrines built around the body of the king, who's buried not just in one gold coffin, but in multiple gold coffins. The beautiful face mask, also in gold, inlaid with precious stones, that's on top of him. But King Tut wasn't that popular in ancient Egypt. He lived at a time that later Egyptians, in fact, wrote out of history. So he was the successor of a king who is sometimes referred to as the heretic king, Akhenaten, who introduced a monotheistic religion in ancient Egypt. And Tutankhamun was one of the kings who returned ancient Egypt to its original polytheistic religion and opened the temples again. The fact that he was short-lived, not well known in later Egypt, probably contributed to the fact that his tomb was preserved. Nobody thought to look for it.
That is fantastic. Love the position. This reminds me of a specific practice that the ancient Romans did. At the end of the day, you know, people in power will oftentimes have overlapping techniques when it comes to population control and information control, which is, of course, a subsidiary of population and mass control. And that is the damnatio memoriae. What that is that there were Roman politicians, Roman members of the senatorial class, consuls, but most importantly, emperors that would do everything they could and everything in their power to cancel out the memory of previous emperors. That's because they were political opponents, that's because things that they had done. But at the end of the day, the damnatio memoriae is exactly that. You destroy every statue, you remove every mention, you take them out of iconography, you make sure that you cannot even say their names, and once you do that, you delete their image. and therefore any possible influence that whatever they said or whatever they did will have to your specific dominion. So yeah, that's something the Romans did, and unfortunately, because it's terrible when it comes to then you have to deal with that as someone who tries to reconstruct history accurately, but it is a move that the Romans used a few times towards the hated emperors, if you will, and as we can see, the Egyptians did too. Although in this case, it actually helped. Isn't that crazy?
K-Bronx 2 asks, did you know that we can't recreate the Egyptian pyramids with modern day technology? Well, guess that means maybe we weren't the most advanced the human species has ever been. So we absolutely have the technology to recreate the pyramids. The tools that the Egyptians were using to create these big stone blocks to make the pyramid were of two types. Rough stone balls of very hard stone, which dropped repeatedly, wear away the stone to do the major quarrying. The fine chiseling on these blocks is being done with copper tools. These copper tools would have required a huge workforce just to keep the copper tools sharp. So how do you get a straight vertical side on a piece of stone? Here you use gravity and a tool that engineers still use, a plumb bob, which is a weight on a string. And with a weighted string just hung, you just hold it in your hand, you know that that string is absolutely vertical. So if you're trying to get the side of a piece of stone vertical, you hold a plumb bob next to it and you just correct. You keep chiseling away at that stone until it is perfectly straight. So it would have taken decades to build the Great Pyramid at Giza. The stone was mostly quarried locally. You need the stones themselves to be squared and you need the ground to be level. How do you get the ground level? You carve a channel in the ground and fill it with water, and the water itself, again, gravity, will level, and you can mark that water level across your entire site. So in the end, it's not impossible technologically to build pyramids any longer. It's a social choice. We choose not to build pyramids any longer. It's not that we've lost the ability.
Okay, very good answer, but I think what the person meant, and that is the part that is it's a little bit of a myth. The person who wrote the comment or the question said that we are not capable today with modern technology to recreate the pyramids, and as she correctly pointed out, that is not true. Of course, with modern tech we could build the pyramids. Now, whether it's a social choice like the professor is saying, Professor Bestock, she's fantastic up to now, by the way, I don't know, that's debatable. Maybe that's the only thing I could be. I mean, what's social about not building them? I'm not sure what she means by that exactly. We don't build them because we don't build stuff from thousands of years ago. We build other things. We build things from our period, occasionally inspired by things that were done in the past. Like if you look at, for example, early American buildings all the way up to the freaking White House, you can tell that they are modeled after classical antiquity, specifically, Greek columns and Greek art and ancient Roman art and architecture. So sometimes we get inspired by the way things were built, and then other times, even in the way we build some cathedrals in our day and age, is inspired to the way, kind of keep them similar to the way they're built in the medieval period. But then again, I don't know if it's a social choice not to build a pyramid right now. I mean, what would be the purpose of it? The beauty of the pyramid is the fact that they are ancient. So if you build a pyramid today, you could do it. It's just that what's the point? I mean, at that point, just preserve the ancient ones rather than building a new one. But if you wanted to, you could. I wouldn't have any problems with it. But again, I'm not trying to build a straw man. I'm just trying to understand what she means by that. I think what the original question is a misunderstanding of what people say when they say it's so impressive that the ancient Egyptians could do that and we couldn't reproduce it today. What we mean by that is that we couldn't reproduce it today using what we believe to be period tools and techniques, because we haven't fully understood how they did it. That's what that statement is. So could we build the pyramids using modern tech? Yes. But could we rebuild the pyramids if we used the tools and techniques we think they had in period? No, because clearly we are missing something. So that's what's impressive about that, and that was the misunderstanding of that question, I believe, is that it's true that we can't modernly recreate the pyramids, but if we try and use the tools we think they had. That's just for context.
At C. Vanford asks, who was the best pharaoh? Many people might say that Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid, was the best pharaoh, but my personal favorite pharaoh would probably be Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was a woman. She reigned as a king, not as a queen. That's not so much, we think, because she was trying to pretend that she was a man, as because this was a role usually played by men. In her inscriptions, for instance, she is still using feminine forms of the verbs, of words to refer to herself, but she's shown just like a male pharaoh. At Salma.
Okay, I mean, it's a favorite. It's fine if it's a favorite. I appreciate this more, to be honest, than someone like the ancient Roman expert that was asked who was the best Roman emperor, and she replied, no one, because they would be horrible by modern standards. I mean, that is what I cringe at. At least she's like, yeah, you know, people say this, for me personally is that, and then she says, because she was a woman. Hey, whatever. I usually prefer a little more of a maybe deeper reason than just the gender of a person. Maybe I would prefer to look at their policy, to look at what they did, maybe military accomplishments, maybe the way they organized the masses. I mean, that's what I would use to select a favorite emperor, to select Augustus, by the way, to select a favorite pharaoh as well. But then again, you know, so far she hasn't pushed any politics whatsoever. So I think that's just a personal choice. And of course, she's free to say it. Freedom. Always freedom. So no problems with that. Let's continue.
Asks, so what did ancient Egyptians talk like? Like, what did it sound like? Hieroglyphics ain't speech. We know a great deal about what Egyptian sounded like, in part because the last stage of the ancient Egyptian language, Coptic, is both written in Greek letters, which we can still read, and in fact, it's still the liturgical language of the Coptic Church. And so if you go watch The Mummy, you can hear much of what ancient Egypt sounded like. We are able to phonetically reconstruct what it sounded like. All mummy movies have somebody named Imhotep. Imhotep was the architect.
I kind of want to let her speak, finish a point, and then I'll interject. But so far, yeah, I mean, it is true, though, that it's not as definitive, the reconstruction of ancient Egyptians and how the hieroglyphs sounded like. It's not as definitive as, for example, Latin is, or ancient Greek in Attic pronunciation. Those have been reconstructed with a higher degree of certainty when it comes to ancient Egyptian. Sure, through Coptic, as I have mentioned before, by the way, Coptic is a massive indicator that helps, but of course there are some vowel shifts that happen that are not the easiest to reconstruct, and so we don't know 100% when it comes to the vowel systems. We have a good indicator in Coptic, but sometimes then we have to reconstruct and deconstruct. That is one of the reasons why, for example, the very overused word Kemet is not even 100% sure that is the correct pronunciation. Another possible to mean ancient Egypt, by the way, because of course Egypt as a term was not the way they would pronounce it in ancient Egyptian. Was it pronounced Kemet? Maybe, maybe not. It's possible that it was pronounced Kumat. It's another possible vocalization. And when it comes to the vowels, there are many vowels of convention, unfortunately. It's not completely reconstructed, but probably sounded really cool, and I love the way it sounds in The Mummy. So, nice choice. Plus, I like she's smiley. She's smiley. I love that. Very nice.
Responsible for designing the first pyramid built in Egypt. At Miss Jenny asks, how did the ancient Egyptians get the brain out of the nose during embalming? So this big wet thing in your head that needs to come out during embalming could be extracted through the nose. And we have metal hooks that we think were used by jamming them up to break the nose bone, scramble the brain so that it's more or less liquid, and then with a combination of gravity and the hook on that metal, you pull it out.
You know what? I'm going to skip this one. Sorry, guys. I can't take it.
Because they thought the heart was the seat of intelligence, not the brain, removing it was a way to ensure that the head would be preserved. At Rafib asks, did ancient Egypt have cookies? Ancient Egyptians had bread. They didn't have sugar, so their baked goods probably weren't sweet and delicious. Bread
with honey, though. You can add honey and make it naturally sweet.
Was the staple that was even used as wages, as a kind of money, so you would be paid in bread. And that was probably the majority of most people's diets. This is in fact a consolidated lump of the stratigraphic layers. This section represents probably between 30 and 50 years of living. You can see potsherds here. But when we get it under the microscope, we can also see things like the remains of the food. We have fish bones, we have tiny bits of grain, but we do know some about the legumes that they ate, things like lentils. We have onions and other vegetables that were eaten. Lettuce was considered to be an aphrodisiac in ancient Egypt.
Really?
Shewart Birder asks, who the deciphered hieroglyphics and how did they do it? Hieroglyphs were deciphered by a French scholar named Champollion. Champollion was one of a group of European scholars who was working on a document that had been discovered when Napoleon invaded Egypt in the late 18th century. The Rosetta Stone is a trilingual inscription from the Ptolemaic period, the late part of Egyptian history. It's basically a legal document about taxes and the temple. The top part of the inscription is in Egyptian hieroglyphs, and the middle is in Demotic script. The bottom one is Greek. We've never lost the ability to read Greek. Now, it took more than 20 years after this was discovered for the decipherment to be finished. Now, Champollion was aided by a guess that he had that when he saw little circles around a set of hieroglyphs in the hieroglyphic portion, that probably was a royal name. And the very first thing he could read was, in fact, the name of Cleopatra.
That is so fascinating. There was a class that I took at university which was called Theory and Practice of Translation, and it covered a lot of stuff like this. And of course, this is one of the most famous things, the Rosetta Stone. It's absolutely fascinating. And the fact that it's trilingual, I think, is what killed it. Already, if you had, in a positive sense, already if you have two, it would have helped. But three really helps, because then if you are uncertain, I think this word means that, but does it? And then you translate it from the middle section, like, yeah, I think it does. Double confirmation. It is spectacular. And it's interesting that even though you lost some of it, it was still enough to be able to decode enough words. It's amazing. Also, because if you think about it, I mean, Egyptian hieroglyphs, you don't have as many hieroglyphs as you have Chinese characters, for example. In both Chinese and Japanese, literacy needs around 2,000 characters around. It kind of changes a little bit. But when it comes to hieroglyphs, it's about 700 to 800 to basically have everything you need in order to be able to read and write a language. I would say a little easier than those languages, but once again, they didn't write vowels, sounds, so that makes it harder. It's like, from that point of view, when it comes to the transcription and transliteration of vowels, it's closer to Semitic script than the way the Bible was written, whereas both in Chinese and Japanese, vowels are part of it. So yeah, that's interesting. It is a fascinating topic.
Once Champollion was able to read the Rosetta Stone, this was really cracking the code of hieroglyphs, and this led to the ability to read increasingly large numbers of inscriptions. At George Stiles asks, have you ever read the Egyptian Book of the Dead? If so, what was interesting about it?
Oh, so
we have read the Egyptian Book of the Dead. We have a piece of one copy here. This is just a chunk of it. This papyrus is many, many, many meters long. And so the part that we see illustrated here, in fact, is what we call the weighing of the heart. This guy's heart is on a scale, and the gods are weighing his heart against a feather. If his heart is as light as a feather, then his heart is pure and it will not speak against him, and that means he can go into the afterlife. This very long scroll of the Book of the Dead would be rolled up and tucked between the legs of the dead guy in his tomb. So this was something that everybody who could afford one wanted a copy of, because it's spells that allow him to get into the afterlife and be successful there. That is like a cheat sheet for getting into the afterlife successfully.
Very fun.
At Just Talking To asks, what were ancient Egyptian scarabs actually used for? Most Egyptian scarabs were ring bezels, so they were on a piece of metal that would have been on a ring, and they had an inscribed bit on the flat bottom that was used as a seal. Seals like this. So a scarab beetle rolls a ball of dung up over a hill. The Egyptians associated that image with the rising sun, and they gave the scarab credit for bringing the sun into being. So in having a scarab as your seal, you are linking yourself to the rebirth of the sun every day.
Splendid, splendid. I love you can tell she's passionate about this. Very interesting.
Ducky Aisha asks, what's your favorite thing you've learned about women in ancient Egypt from your archaeological finds? Women in ancient Egypt had a status that was really rare in the ancient world. They could own things, own property. They could decide which of their children inherited their property. Men got off work when their women in their household had their periods. So when women had their period, they could expect that their husbands had to do the housework for them. At Black
that's funny.
Black Jess Rabbit asks, I wonder what the ancient Egyptians' view on sex was. The ancient Egyptians really liked sex, and they were not prude about it, and they weren't shy about it. They actually did have a euphemism for to have sex. They would say to spend a pleasant day. It was just totally accepted that sex was a normal and...
To spend a pleasant day. That's a nice way to say it. It's like it's polite, but it gets the point.
present day. It was just totally accepted that sex was a normal and enjoyable part of life, and it wasn't something that was stigmatized in the same way it has been in many other cultures. One way we can really see this, the ancient Egyptian language did not have the word virgin. There was no idea that having sex changed your social position. It was just something people did and really liked. At LX Yacht asks, don't Egyptian deities all have animal heads? Not all ancient Egyptian deities have animal heads, but many of them do. We have a bunch of gods here on this piece of the Book of the Dead. We have the god Horus, we can see here, with a falcon head, particularly associated with kingship. In the scene is Anubis, and he is shown with the jackal head that is typical of gods who are associated with cemeteries. We think that's in part because cemeteries in the desert are places where jackals actually would have roamed. At Mazam Marwa asks, y'all, ancient Egypt is wild to me. How did they just discover a new queen and over 100 new mummies? From aerial photography to now really high-tech satellites, we're able to see from the air and see patterns of difference on the ground that can relate to things that are not visible when you walk on the ground. We use X-ray fluorescence, and we point an XRF X-ray fluorescence gun at a wall with pigments on it. We can get the chemical signature of the pigments. If they're using lapis as a pigment, lapis is the most pure blue pigment that's available. It's also really expensive, and the only ancient source for lapis is in what's modern Afghanistan. It's really far away. So questions about the interactions between Egypt and its broader world are new kinds of questions that technology opens up for us. We will not find another King Tut's tomb probably, but we have a ton left to uncover.
Absolutely.
So those are all the questions for today.
Well, she was good. She was great. She was good. Some fresh air as opposed to the usual nonsense that Wired as a channel pushes. This time they had an expert that was clearly competent. She knew what she was saying. By the way, when she spoke about the X-ray fluorescence, gosh, I can't even pronounce it. I have seen a few studies that had to do both with the ancient Romans and specifically with the tomb of Seti I, and I've mentioned them already in a few dedicated videos on this channel. This time they exist, but I might kind of put them together again into a new video discussing how these techniques and these specific scientific approaches and technology, if you will, can help us and has helped us to clear and also debunk a lot of myths when it comes to original state of a lot of these beautiful pieces of art and mural art and colors also that the ancients had access to. But anyways, I think for today we got a good video. Just a couple of things were a little, but it was good. It was good. So you know me. If I don't think that it's good, I'll say it. What I like about this video and what I like about her specifically is that she was asked to speak about ancient Egypt and she spoke about ancient Egypt. I don't know her politics. I don't know if she's religious. I don't know if she's an atheist. I don't know anything. And isn't that great? Because at the end of the day, she's not letting that slip through. I know that few of you might think that she put some feminist ideas into this, but I don't really think so. I think she did it in a way that when it's feminist movements from the 60s is one thing, and then some of those modern feminists can get really obnoxious. So it really depends, and I would always like to put a separation between the two. But in general, she did not give that feel at all. So, you know, she's a woman, so she's interested in women and how they lived. Or if she joked a little bit about, oh, the husband now has got to do the housework. It's fine. She said it in a kind way. She said it in a funny way. And I think she seems to me to be a nice person. And I appreciate that. And even when she said that her favorite pharaoh was a woman, again, she didn't say it in a way that now she's going to twist the facts so that she's going to make women appear different to what they were. She didn't do that. So she's a woman and she wants to relate to another woman in the past. There is nothing wrong with that. We always have to be good. We have to be capable of distinguishing the things, because I think today people are too like, feminist, or woke, or fascist. No, we need to be fair. You know me, I'll call it out anytime something like that happens, no matter what, no matter who. But in this case, I did not get any feel that she was pushing anything but what she knows because of her expertise. I really much appreciated that. All right, number one, so this is pretty much the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed it so far, and if you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you haven't, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Also, don't forget the amazing offer by Incogni. Make use of that by clicking the link in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.